We have already tested our Xamarin application on Android on a simulator, as well as on iOS on Xamarin Live Player. But some of you may not be using Xamarin Live Player to test your applications because it requires preview tools that you may have chosen not to install. And that's okay, we can still test our iOS applications. But if we want to test our iOS applications differently, meaning with an iOS emulator, we will need a Mac computer. And just like we saw before, we need to have that Mac computer connected to the same network and already connected to Visual Studio. So let's make sure that we are connected to our Mac by going to Visual Studio, going to the Tools menu, Options, navigate down to Xamarin, select iOS Settings, and evaluate if our Mac is connected. If it's not, we can go to Find Xamarin Mac Agent, ignore the Xamarin instructions, select our Mac, and select Connect. Once you have successfully connected to the Xamarin Mac Agent, you will see that the Mac icon in here shows now in color, so you can click on OK, and now you will be able to run the iOS application on the iOS emulator. To do that, you will have to change the target application or the target platform that you're going to be launching from Android to iOS. As soon as you make this change, and because you are connected to a Mac computer, more specifically to the Xamarin Mac Agent, you will see a list of all of the emulators that are available through your Mac. In this case, you will see the list of emulators that are installed and ready through Xcode. Because of the version of Xcode that I have installed, I see iOS emulators for 10.3. In case you have a previous or a later version of Xcode installed, you may see maybe iOS 11 emulators or iOS 10.2 or 10 emulators in here. All you have to do in here is choose whatever emulator you want. In my case, and to make the test a little bit faster, I am going to select an emulator that doesn't require a lot of resources, for example, an iPhone 5S emulator. You could always choose emulators like the iPhone 7 Plus or the iPad Pro 9.7 inch or the iPad Pro 12.9 inch, but keep in mind that these require more resources than testing on a smaller device like the iPhone 5S or even the iPhone 5. Once you have selected the emulator, all you have to do is click on Run, and the emulator will launch. But this will launch in your Mac computer. Even though you are running from Visual Studio on Windows, the emulator will actually be launched on Mac. If you are on Visual Studio for Mac, well, you do not need to have a Mac connected because you already have a Mac, and this will launch on your computer. So while this runs, let me go ahead and change the screen to my Mac computer so you can see the application up and running right on my Mac. So I am here on my Mac. I noticed that Visual Studio from Windows has started the launch of my iPhone 5S emulator right on my Mac. And right now, while it is still launching, let's take a look at how we can make this look better on my screen because it looks just big, even though this is only the iPhone 5S. Imagine how the iPhone 7 Plus will look. So with the simulator selected, all you have to do is navigate to the Window menu, go to the Scale section, and you can change this from 100% to maybe 50% in this case. Or because this is an iPhone 5S, maybe the 75% setting looks better. There we go. And now, all you have to do is wait for the emulator to be launched, and once the emulator is launched, the application will be run directly from Visual Studio on my Windows computer. The same thing will happen if you run from Visual Studio on your Mac, except of course you do not need to connect anything else. Everything will just be running directly from your Mac computer. Once the emulator is ready and the application is launched, you will see that it looks very similar to what we see on Android, except of course that the elements that are being displayed are iOS native. You can see that Welcome to Xamarin Forms label, the text box or the entry, and the button. The most noticeable difference is the button because it looks different on iOS than on Android, where everything else looks pretty much the same. And it works the same as well. If you write down your name in here, for example, let me write mine, and then go ahead and click on the button, you see how the text changes from Welcome to Xamarin Forms to Welcome and whatever I wrote inside of the text field. As you can see, testing on iOS is very straightforward, especially if you are already on a Mac. If you're on Windows, you do have to have a Mac connected to the same network and navigate from Windows to your Mac to check out the application running on the emulator that launches directly on the Mac. With this ready, we have successfully developed our first Xamarin Forms application. A very simple application that is pretty much a Hello World application that allowed us to figure out how to use XAML to create the interface, and how to use C# to define the logic that we implemented when we click on the Say Hello button. We have also tested this application on an iOS emulator, on an Android emulator, and even on Xamarin Live Player, so we can test the application live and even test an iOS application directly from Windows without the need of having a Mac connected. In the next section, we're going to continue creating another Xamarin Forms application, but this time we're going to be using PCL or Portable Class Library to share code between the platforms, and we're going to really dig deep into what Xamarin Forms will allow us to do when it comes to developing our applications.